Hello and welcome to Take Control of Your Career. If you are looking to level up in your career, then you are in the right place. Today, I'm so pleased to invite Stephanie Chung to join us on the show. She is the Chief Growth Officer of Wheels Up, a private aviation company, and she is widely recognized as the first Black president of a major aviation company in the United States and only the second female. So, really lucky to have her with us today. She is an inspiring leader and has so much to share. Welcome, Stephanie.
Oh, thanks so much, Lauren. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started and just learn about you. Tell us about yourself and your career journey.
Sure. So, I always like to start at the very beginning because it has a lot to do with what I do today. But I started off, interesting life, I should say, is because my dad was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. So I grew up a military kid. And why that's unique is because I was one of those military kids, Lauren, that moved every 2 years of my life. And so, I can't even tell you how many schools I went to, how many, places I've lived and all that, but it was a really awesome childhood. But the reason I bring that up is because my dad, because he was a master sergeant in the US Air Force and I always lived on active Air Force bases, I grew up around planes. And so I was one of those kids that knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be in aviation. I didn't know what I could do in aviation, but I knew that I wanted to do something in this space. And, one of the challenges that I had, and the reason why, though I knew I wanted to be in aviation, but didn't know what I could do, was actually really simple. Because whenever I would see, as a little girl, Lauren, right? Whenever I would watch TV or look at magazines or, watch movies or anything of that nature, whenever there was anyone depicted in aviation, it was if you were a man, you were a pilot, or if you were a female, you were a flight attendant.
Yep.
But neither one of those pictures ever looked like someone like me. And so I knew I couldn't be a pilot, supposedly, because I wasn't a male. And I didn't know if I could be a flight attendant because I certainly didn't see anyone of color depicted as a flight attendant. So I really started off at the bottom. I ended up parking planes and loading luggage at the Boston Logan Airport. That was my very first aviation job.
And look where you are today.
And look where I
Amazing.
am
What a
today,
career
Lauren.
journey.
So the message for your listeners is it doesn't matter where you start, right? It's truly about where you finish. But I did. I started off at the ramp, and I loved that job though. I was like one of a handful of women. This was way back in the day. I've been in aviation for almost 40 years, so long time ago, and only a handful of us women were working the ramp. But I learned so much working down there. I learned the operation of aviation, which was really what little did I know was going to be very instrumental in my development as a leader, in the future. But so back to the story, I started off loading luggage, parking planes, and then ended up selling for the major airlines. So I sold for US Air, I sold for, which of course is now American Airlines, I sold for Delta, and then I ended up getting recruited. So I got recruited from the airlines into private aviation. And that's drastically different, kind of like you and I were talking before we went on air. The private aviation space is just, it's a wonderful career, but it's very, very different. You're really working with the movers and shakers of the world's economy or the world's most influential people. And so I sold everything from, one-off charters to fractional shares, which is like a timeshare, but for private jets, all the way up to, actual private jets themselves. And then I ended up taking leadership positions where I led teams who sold everything from fractionals to jet cards to
Mhm.
selling their own planes or selling planes, I should say, to individuals. And then from there, I ended up getting appointed the president at JetSuite, and that was part of the stuff that you mentioned when you first introed me. So that appointment as JetSuite's president did allow me to become the first Black to ever lead a major private aviation company here in the United States, and of course, only the second female. So I did that, and then about 18 months ago, I actually joined Wheels Up, where I'm now the chief growth officer. And everything that me and my team are focused in on, which kind of relates back to my original story about getting into aviation, not knowing what I could do, is really my team and I focus in on how do we diversify the private aviation space. So we specifically look for growing our consumer base from the female perspective, or the female segments, the people of color segments, as well as the LGBTQ plus segments.
So much to go into there, and I'm really interested in understanding more about what your vision is for increasing some of those segments. First, let's stay with you though. So, as a Black woman in the aviation industry, you've obviously stood out over the years as the only woman, the only Black person, the only Black woman. So, how have you made sure that you're standing out in the right way in order to move your career forward? Because that's something that I think, especially for women in more male dominated industries, you don't want to stand out just because you're a woman, but you want to make sure to take advantage of every opportunity to call yourself out in the right way.
Yeah, I love that question. Like, I absolutely love that question. So good for you dropping the we're getting ready to get into the good tea right on the front end. But the very first thing, you're right. My whole career, Lauren, I've pretty much been an only. Thankfully, that's starting to change, but it's 2022, right? But I'm fortunate because at Wills Up, we have a few of us women on in the C-suite, as well as I'm one of two African Americans in the C-suite, as well as we have some folks that are also of color in the C-suite also. So we've got a very diverse leadership team
Hmm.
at Wills Up, which makes me thrilled, right? But before getting here, to your point, yes, I was the only my entire career. And the very first thing that I did to stand out is I had to really make that decision that I was going to lean into it. And that's really important because a lot of times, and I know a lot of your listeners are probably either they're the onlys in their industry, or they're probably going to become an only soon, and it's not easy. Right? It's really not easy. And it takes a certain level of courage to be able to stand alone, have a different thought process, be able to challenge the status quo, et cetera. But I would
And
say
have the
the
confidence
and have the
to stand
confidence.
your ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say, the biggest thing is you first have to make a decision. For me, I knew, like, in this industry, I'm going to be the only for a while. And so I need to lean into it versus shy away from it. Because if you shy away from it, then you really don't make change and you don't get yourself in a position to be able to make the changes, right?
Hmm.
So that was the first thing. The second thing is, and I always like to share with people, is you really have to figure out what is your personal brand, because any major decision, and I heard this advice really early on in my career, and so it's not even mine, but I love it, and I share it whenever I can to whoever will listen. Anytime any major decision is being made about your career, you're not going to be in the room. Let me say that again. Any and every major decision about your career, you will not be in the room.
That is such a pow statement because
Isn't
it's so
that crazy?
true.
It's so
Hmm.
true. It's so true. So, what you have to do is you have to realize that you yourself are a brand. So, though you may work for a company and certainly you represent, you're a brand ambassador for whatever company you work for, but you yourself are a brand. And so, the question that you have to ask yourself, going back to your original question of standing out the right way, is what does your brand actually stand for? That's going to be really an exercise that everybody needs to take the time to really process, right? What does your brand stand for? Because when those discussions are being had about who should take on the next project or who should be promoted or who should take over that department or any of those things, your brand is going to be hopefully brought up in the conversation. But because you're not there to elaborate or defend it, your brand will have to stand by itself. And so the real question you have to ask yourself is, who are you? And what does your brand really stand for? And what is it that you want it to stand for? And then every single day, everything that you do, whether it's your work, your how much you pay attention, how much attention you give to others, et cetera, all of that has to line up into what you've decided your brand's going to represent.
So well said. Okay, so I want to start first by you telling us, what does your brand represent?
Ooh, I love that.
How have you lived that in your career, and how have you made sure that when you're not in the room, they say, Stephanie, she's the one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll really answer it two different ways, right? Because it's so funny that it's so funny that you've asked this question. A lot of times people will ask me, what does my brand stand for? And what I've done over the years is, instead of me giving what I think my brand stands for, is I actually ask people who have worked with me, who have worked for me, who have led, been my leaders, or people that I've led, or colleagues, or what have you. What are the words that you would use to describe my leadership, right?
Yep.
And the words that have consistently come back back to me over the years, and I would say it very much is true. And you and I know each other, so you you tell me if you would say these are the same words as well. The words that come back are I'm fun, I'm fair, and I'm tough. I demand excellence when you work on my team or if you're working with me on a project. And so, fun, fair, and tough are really the words that tend to come out when people are talking about my brand. Now, going a little bit deeper, how I like to see my brand is I want to make sure that my work is excellent. So that above anything else, you know that if you give me a project or you give me a department, or if I, step up and take on the role of leading something, that it's going to be done, but it's going to be done with the level of excellence. And I trace that back to being a child of a soldier, right? A little girl growing up
Yeah,
around,
absolutely.
America's finest, which is our men and women who are serving us every day to protect us.
Hmm.
I grew up around people who were excellent every single day. And as a little girl, I
In
had
the most
no
difficult
idea
circumstances
in
as
the most
well.
difficult circumstances. So, Lauren, when I was little, I didn't actually know this or appreciate it or have the wisdom, right, to even kind of put all this together. But as an adult, I'm so grateful for the upbringing that I had because, if you look at any typical soldier, their pants are creased, like they don't have wrinkly pants on, right? Or a wrinkly shirt. Their shoes are, spit shined, right? So they're not
No
dusty or
Zoom
no, yeah,
sweatshirts.
no Zoom sweatshirts. Their hair is in place, nicely trimmed. So all of those little details, which really little details add up to excellence. Little
Yep.
did I know that growing up and seeing people who were, physically fit, like just perfection as far as their body and how they treated it and needed it to work for them, right? And under some extremely difficult situations. And so growing up around that really shaped who I am as a leader. So yes, though I appreciate when people say, "Hey, you give something to Stephanie, she's going to get the job done because she's fun, fair, and tough." But more importantly, I like to see myself as a leader who is really value centered. And that, I had to evolve to that over the years. I certainly am in a place now where I stand for that. Like there's certain things that I simply will not, but I'll stand for on principle, right? And so for me, being really centered as a leader on values is really
Hmm.
important to me.
I think you're so on target with all of those things. And one of the things that I want to point out to the people listening is that a lot of times in the job search process, especially, people will talk about like a 30-second elevator pitch or something along those lines. And it's the kind of thing that you practically have to read out loud, and no one can remember it. And guess what? No one who's listening can remember it either.
I
But
like
when
that.
you can really boil it down to what's the two or three, four words that makes people think, where it really clearly articulates the value that you bring, that's where a true brand is. It's not in the long drawn out multi-sentence kind of pitch, but it's where people can listen to it and say, yes, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. You're so right. You are so right. And then you have to, not only do you get it, right? But also you have to live it, And so when I made a comment about being a valued centered leader, when
Yep.
I think about times that I've had to live that, because it's easy to say it, right? But then when the rubber hits the road, it's like, are you going to have the guts to actually, back it up, right? And
Yeah.
and I remember, one time I was leading a team, and this is when I had a team that they sold private jets. And so these are high ticket items, as you can imagine. And one of my leaders had made a mistake. And the policy and the process that I had on my team was really simple. If you're going to send a proposal to a customer, and if your support team, puts it together for you, no problem. But you, as the sales director, always have to spot check it, double check it, make sure the numbers are all right, et cetera. Again, we're dealing with very high ticket numbers, right?
Right. If you miss a zero, it's a
You miss
problem.
zero, it's a big deal, right? So this particular situation, the salesperson had to go catch a flight, so he counted on his sales support person to put together the proposal, which they did, and then the sales director didn't have time to look at it, jumped on a flight, left. The sales support person sends off the proposal, and the numbers were wrong, right? And so it was I'll never forget this. It was a $375,000 mistake. Okay. And the customer was holding our feet to the fire. He wasn't going to back down. As far as he's concerned, this is what we gave him and we need to honor it. So as you can imagine, that didn't go over well in the company. And so I remember getting called into the CEO's office, and he was livid, like rightfully so, but just had lost his mind and was screaming at me while I stood there taking it. And he wanted to know who made the mistake. Who made the mistake? And this goes back to your question about, living out as a leader. And it's made a comment about being a valued center leader. Who made the mistake? He kept screaming that literally. And he was probably this close to my face. And I remember at that point, I could have made a decision to give up the person's name, right? But I didn't. And I remember standing there, shaking, right? Because there was such an intense meeting. And I said to him, I said, I made the mistake. And that just made him madder. Lauren was like, like he actually lost his mind even more because he was like, you didn't make the mistake. You don't write proposals. You don't like, he knew there's no way I would have written a proposal.
Right.
It's just not something that I did. And so he's like, you didn't make the mistake. And he had a lot more, lively language than that. But I remember standing there and I said to him, it doesn't matter who made the mistake. On my team, we have a process and a protocol, and it wasn't followed. So as far as you're concerned, I made the mistake. Now I'll handle my sales director, and I'll get that all cleaned up. But as far as you're concerned, the mistake was mine. And I use that as an example because that's when you're living out your brand, right? And to your point, it's not just a logo or something. It's like I can say whatever I want to say, but it's all about how do I actually deliver when the rubber hits the road.
I'm curious in the aftermath of that, what happened with your team in terms of, I imagine they had your back
Yeah.
then and that much more focused on over delivering for
Yeah.
making it right.
That's such a it's a good question because they did. And one of the things I think was really great about probably any team that I've led, but that team in particular, is they knew that when the rubber met the road, that I was going to always have their back. I may not always agree with them, but I'll always have their back. And I use that because, something I didn't mention earlier, I made a comment saying my dad was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. So my father, when as far as I was concerned, was the best leader ever on the planet, right? And so when I got my very first leadership job, I remember the first call I made was to my father. And I called him and I said, Dad, I said, they've just offered me a position. I want to be a really good leader. And, what advice would you have for me? And
Mhm.
he said to me, he says, there's two things you want to just always remember as a leader, Steph. One, always protect your team. And two, always know there's two sides to every story. And so I can tell you as a leader, and this was obviously many, many years ago, but even as a leader today, I still pay attention to those two words, those two pieces of wisdom. And so at that moment, fast forward back to, the $375,000 mistake that I'll never forget. when the time came and my CEO was asking me who made the mistake, my dad's words rang into my head. Always protect your
Mhm.
team. And so
Mhm.
at that moment, that's why I was like, there was no way I was going to give up, who made the mistake because it wasn't important at that point, right? I was going to handle it anyway. But yeah, my team for sure, they knew what all had transpired, but they got to see those types of examples time and time and time again. So it was really, I think with any functional team, the team has to know you have their back. And, equally as important, you have to know that they've got your back, right? They're not out there doing stupid stuff, making bad decisions or bad deals. And so the whole how a team functions correctly is so important, but it's such an instrumental part of true leadership. You can tell so much about the leader by the team and the performance or lack thereof of the team as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Such a good story. Tell us
Mhm.
another story or a situation about a career defining moment that gave you recognition as someone who really had what it took to get to the top. Because
Mm,
there had to be a moment, especially starting out on the ramps, where you never imagined what was potential for you because you couldn't see it. And then
right.
there was a point, I'm sure, where there was an inflection point where it was, wow, maybe I really can get to the top. What was that for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll go back to the first leadership job that I had because, so when that particular gentleman who was these were different companies, right? So this particular leader had come to me and he said, "Steph, I'm going to make." Now at the time I was just a salesperson, so I wasn't leading the sales team. And he says, "I'm going to make some changes at the leadership level and I want you to oversee the sales team." So that was my first sales leadership job, right? And that's the job that I called my dad about. But when he said that, I just remember at first I was like, typical woman. You know what? I don't know that I'm ready. And, I've never led anybody before, and I went through all the reasons why I wouldn't
Yep.
really make the most sense as far as his choice was concerned. But I remember him, I remember him getting a little frustrated. He's somebody I still have a tremendous amount of respect for. We have a great relationship. But he said to me, he said, Steph, I am making a decision to switch out this particular leader, and she will no longer be working here on Friday at 5 o'clock. So the decision you have to ask yourself is, do you want to lead this team, which I have the confidence that you can, or do you want to work for somebody else who I will bring in? Because either way, she's gone Friday at 5. Right. So I remember thinking, well, if you put it that way, sure, why not? I'll do it. Right. But my very first job, so I took the job, and he was frustrated. The reason why she was no longer going to have that position as the leader is because the team wasn't really functioning. I was functioning, which is how I stood out, and because my work was excellent, right? But the rest of the team wasn't functioning to the ability that the CEO needed it to. And so I took the job over, and he says, I want you to get this team in shape. Now, mind you, going back to she's fun, she's fair, she's tough, right? So I knew what I needed to do. These were all my friends. I was their peer 24 hours ago, right? Now
Right. That's
their
a hard
boss.
transition always.
Hard transition, So now I'm their boss, but I have a new mandate, and the mandate is get this team and get it in line and get it to function, and to get it to perform. And so, as their peer, I knew who was good and who had potential, that maybe perhaps that potential needed to be awakened. And I knew who was horrible and who shouldn't have been on the team, period. But now I was in a position to make those decisions, right? And
Hmm.
so the very next day, I jumped on a plane and I pretty much got rid of 80% of the team. I went from city to city to city to city and just knocked
Wow.
it out. And then also then worked really hard to replace the team. And the story was a positive story in the end, and certainly that was a big part that started me catapulting within the company that I worked for at the time, moving up that ladder very quickly because people saw it as she can come in, she can make the tough decisions, she can get a team, to function correctly, and at the end of the day, she can produce the result. And that was a huge part, Lauren, of my progression in private aviation.
Such a great story and so impressive to, in your first leadership role, to have the confidence to make those changes right off the bat.
Mhm.
That's one of the things also going back to brand that I feel like is so critical, that when you really own your brand, it's not just about what it does for you externally and what other people can say about you, but
Mhm.
when you own it and you live it, the confidence that it brings in you is going to be the driver of your success as well.
Totally agree. Could not agree with you more. I mean, really, and again, whether it's your brand, your company's brand, if you're selling the brand, whatever, confidence is really the key. Wouldn't you say?
Yep.
I mean, we
Hmm.
really have to, kind of just hone in on that for a minute because people can. Here's what I always say, because a lot of times, people will say, well, what do you, if I give advice? And my advice is really simple, especially for women, and especially when you're dealing with, executive presence or things of that nature. And it's, you really do have to have the confidence in your capabilities. You have to, just remember every time that you did make it happen. We have enough things in society coming at us that remind us how we're not enough, or how not smart enough, or skinny enough,
Yep.
or all that
Yep.
stuff, right? But you've got to be your own internal cheerleader, and to really, shut down all the negativity and that stinking thinking, as they call it, and figure out how are you going to, do whatever it is that you deem to be important to you based on where it is that you want to go. And so much of it is really about confidence. And you get confidence by doing. Right? You get it by doing, not thinking about it, not asking a million people's opinion about it, but actually doing it and then producing a result. And the only way you're going to produce a result is by doing it. Sometimes you're going to do it and fail. You're going to do it and fall on your
And
face.
and then you're going to learn,
And you're
hopefully.
going to learn, and then you go back and you dust your knees off and you try it again, right? But that's where your confidence comes from. Nobody's born with confidence. And I think so many times, especially we women, it can be so hard on ourselves. But or we and really the sexiest thing about a woman is her confidence, right? So
Right.
it's one of those things that I cannot speak highly enough. It is the more you do, the more mistakes you'll make. The more mistakes you make, the more you learn. The deeper you learn, the faster you learn. So don't be afraid of mistakes. Kind of lean into them, and then that's where your confidence is going to come from. So that at one point you'll be able to stand in your truth and be like, I know what I know, what I know. Right. So
And you know it. You've been there, you've done it, you've lived it, and so impressive. And so we talked earlier in the conversation about how at this point your role as chief growth officer is how do you expand the concept of private aviation beyond, the old white man kind of image that we have in our mind. So you have gotten to the top of the industry here. What more do you want to accomplish?
ooh, that's a good one. That's so good. That's you're now in my head. This is my own little self-talk that I think about often, right? This is legacy work for me at this stage of the game. I have made history. I've gotten to the top in our industry. I'm so grateful for it, and the journey along the way, the good and the bad. I've made some tremendous friends. I've met amazing people. This has been a industry that has loved me, and I have loved it back. Right. So for my last hurrah, if you will, I am all about making sure that I leave the industry better than how I found it. And so, though I love this industry, it's not an industry without its flaws, right? You
Well, and
know,
no industry is going to be that way.
exactly, exactly. And so, really, I am just so focused on making sure that this industry is much more inclusive than it is. I don't want to be the anomaly, right? I don't want to be where people are like, oh, they're just talking about, the one who made it, right? It's like, no, we can't have that. So, how do we make sure that there is a pipeline of other people who have the potential, who have the wherewithal, who are really ready and in position to be able to be the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, right? So my whole focus is it's a full circle focus, right? Because when I made a
Yep.
comment saying when I first started, images matter, right? There was nothing that made me think that I could do anything in aviation, but I stepped out, took the faith, and did it. And so now where I'm at is really all about making sure that leaving it a better place than I found it simply means to me that everybody is thought of. Everybody's thought of. And so whether it's diversifying the customer base, because typically our industry only markets to one specific type of demographic. So at Wheels Up, we're changing that. We held the very first diversity focused photo shoot so that we showed on planes people of color, people from the LGBTQ plus community. We made sure that the women on the planes were not just, the
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 trophy
the
wives.
the trophy wife, right? Exactly. We had shots where there was nobody on the plane but her because I wanted to make sure that she was depicted as the lady boss. We know that we women are capable. We know that women are crushing it as far as the corporate America is concerned, and they're popping up, in the sweet suite more and more often. So I wanted to make sure that that was a narrative that we put out there. So that's one example of some of the things that we do. So, from anything of making sure that everybody's thought of, making sure that we have product and services that are great for multicultural segments, making sure that even internally, my group runs alongside HR because we want to make sure that our employees that are diverse, do they have a voice at the table? Do they have a strong career path? What is it that we can do that not only do we teach them, but they more importantly can teach us, right? And then how do we
Awesome.
use our brand and my personal brand to also make sure that we're increasing the pipeline of diverse candidates for the entire industry, not just for Wills Up, but for the entire industry? Because at the end of the day, I am determined to make sure that this industry better reflects the world that we live in. So that's what I'm looking to do. And stay tuned for more, Lauren. I'm hell bent on making it happen.
Awesome. Well, I can't imagine that not have it happening with you behind the wheel on that. One last question for you, Stephanie. And I always ask this because you have just been this incredible font of knowledge. I want to know what specific advice or actionable takeaway you would offer women or men that are committed to advancing in their career. What is something that you think is that fail safe action that someone can take that's going to help them get to that next level?
This is such a simple, it's a great question, by the way. It's such a simple answer for me, but it has changed my life. Okay.
Okay,
It's,
I must know
yeah,
right
you
now.
have, get ready. I'm getting ready to drop a bomb. No, it really is so simple. Learn how to say no. That's really it. We all are so busy. There's literally, I mean, do you know anybody, Lauren, that is not up to their eyeballs in just stuff, whether it's work or kids or, career? I mean, everybody's so incredibly busy. And, one of the things that we have to do, especially as women, is we have to learn how to say no. In other words, and I'm going to actually share with people how I say no, because the more, the higher level you get, the more demand gets on your time, right? Different
Right.
level, different devil. And so you have to learn how to say no. Learning how to say no is good in general, but
Yep.
certainly if you want to make impact, you won't have time to do those things that aren't important. Right. If you're really going to make significant change or do impactful work, your time is your money. And so, how I tell people no, I say it with, I'm full of grace and big old smiles on my face, but this is what I say. Let's say you and I were talking and you asked me to, if I could help volunteer for this or do that or serve here or whatever. What I would say to you is, Lauren, thank you so much for asking me. I really appreciate you thinking about me. Unfortunately, I won't be able to participate, but thank you nevertheless for inviting me. And that's it.
Gracious.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't tell you call me next week, or I can't because of this, that, and the other. If I don't want to do it now, I don't want to do it next week, right? And so there's no reason for
Ha.
me to give you a whole lot of detail. It doesn't matter. The point of the matter is based on the amount of time that I have, what you're offering to me is not worth me giving up that time, right? Time spent on one thing is time away from something else. If I'm trying to be purposeful in life and intentional, then I know what it is that I need to do in order to get what it is that I need to get accomplished. And so not everything that comes to us is going to be worthy of our time. And it takes guts to say that, right? Because we're usually so
Right.
programmed to not want to hurt people's feelings. But the truth of the matter is, we're trying to really leave legacy for our families and our kids and, or in my case, an industry or, history or whatever. And so it's okay to say no. And I promise you, you learn how to say no with grace, you will have much better, better quality of life, right? Because you're doing the things that are important to you, that you want to do versus doing things that other people want you to do.
And is there a litmus test of what are the things that you say yes to so that you can
Mhm.
make sure that you're laser focused on the right things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would tell you that changes in every season of my life, right? Depending on what it is that I'm looking to get accomplished. So I may say yes to things now that I wouldn't necessarily have said yes to maybe a year ago, right? And vice versa. So it really just depends on where you are in life, what it is that you're focused on, what are you trying to get accomplished, or what is it that maybe you're taking a breather? Maybe you're not trying to accomplish anything, right? You're kind of stepping back and being like, you know, and
Yeah,
taking
well,
that
and
breather.
as I think
Mhm.
about this, what's playing in my head is what's the thing that I'm excited to get up and do and
Yes.
or that's going to move my career forward, move my
Mhm.
business forward, whatever the case may be. And
Mhm.
what's the other thing that is weighing me down inside, being like, "Ugh," or, that you're
Yeah.
procrastinating about. And so those are maybe some other ways to think about what are the yes items and what are the no items.
That's right. No, that's really good wisdom that you just dropped for your listeners for sure. I could not agree with you more. You instinctively know what you want to do and don't want to do, right? 100%, especially we women with our intuition, we know that stuff that's going to get us excited, or the stuff that's going to suck the wind out of us, right? That if it's going to suck the wind out of you, or you're already thinking like, how do I get out of this? Just say no, right? So yeah, definitely use your own intuition. You know the answers to that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I cannot believe the amount of incredible advice you shared with us today. So I am so appreciative of you joining us and really can't wait to see what happens next for you.
You're the best. Thanks so much for having me, Lauren. This was fun.
It was fun. Thanks. Bye.